Michael Pollan, welcome to Silver Ales.
Thank you very much.
I have here two of your books, Food Rules and Defense of Food. There's a third one called The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Right.
And you're a journalist, you're a book writer, you're a lecturer, professor at Berkeley, and your main subject is food. And food is, of course, very important. Your title, Food Rules. These are not just rules about how to eat it, but it's an indication that food the importance of food.
Well, it's the most important industry in the world, the biggest, but it's also our most powerful connection to the natural world. And it's something that we've forgotten. And in a way, what I'm doing would have been impossible to do 100 years ago because everybody knew this.
Yeah.
Everybody understood that nature is what feeds us, not industry. But in a highly industrialized economy, the links between us and our food, the animals and the plants and the fungi that feed us, become obscure.
Basically, you say that every generation before us, they just ate what their mothers cooked.
Yeah, tradition told you what to eat. And the power of tradition over food has been weakened, partly from food marketing, from the industry's desire to sell us novel foods, and fast food in particular, and that they have undermined, I think, the authority of tradition with these, glistening, beautifully packaged, very seductive new foods, and the convenience of them, the novelty of their flavors. And so the authority of the mothers and the grandmothers has been eroded to a large extent, certainly in America, although it's happening all over the world. The industrialization of the human diet is a global phenomenon. It's happening right now in China. And so a lot of my work involves reminding people of the connections, where their food comes from. That's another very obvious thing. Everybody knew where their food used to come from.
Yeah.
But now you look at a plate of food and you I wonder what country produced that. And that burger might have the meat of 200 different cows in it from 4 continents now.
Yeah.
And they don't tell us this.
and there are all sorts of strange names.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have names.
The chemicals.
The chemicals, the numbers and the names.
Many unfamiliar, many ingredients in our food that your grandmother would not recognize, indeed that you might not recognize, some of them are petroleum products. They're not even organic products. Well, petroleum is organic, but not in the sense that we think of it.
And this is bad of course this is bad for us, and it's bad for the environment.
Yeah, it's bad in many, many ways. Let's talk about the way it's good, though, first, because it's important to acknowledge the achievements of this food industry before we take them apart. The fact is that they have made food very inexpensive. They have made it possible for people to eat meat every day. Meat used to be a special occasion food in much of the world, and it still is in a lot of places. And they have made the food, transcend the seasons. We can have tomatoes all year round. We can have anything we want whenever we want it. This is an achievement. We must pay respect to the achievement. But we also must pay attention to the cost of that achievement. And the cost is enormous. The cost to our health and the public health, the cost to the environment, to the water, to the soil, and we're learning to the atmosphere, because this industrial food system is responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gases by some estimates. It's a big part of the climate change problem.
But as you point out, in the title of your book, we are omnivores. Men eat basically everything.
Yes, and it's a good thing too, because we couldn't live in places like Iceland if we weren't omnivores.
Yes.
We would still be in Africa eating the one plant that we evolved to eat, like the koala.
But our diet has been narrowing to products that are based on corn, on soy and wheat.
Yes. Yeah. And this is one of the mysteries of the supermarket that confronted me. It looks like a very diversified landscape.
Yes.
There are thousands of food products. In the United States, there's 17,000 new food products every year introduced. Most of them fail, but they try. So it looks like this cornucopia of variety. But in fact, if you break down and look at where the carbon in all this food comes from, and food is mostly carbon, you will find it comes from a cornfield, a soy field, or wheat field.
Yes.
And that basically we've gotten very good at taking a handful of crops, simple crops that are very productive, and breaking them down and putting them back together in the form of processed food. Everything from meat, which in America we feed corn. Yeah. Beef gets fed corn, even though it's not very good for the cows, and not very good for the quality of the meat. And then processed foods. If you take I don't know if you have Twinkies here, but that's a very common cake with cream stuffed in the middle. It's a very long golden thing. And it's kind of an iconic processed food. It's got 37 ingredients, about 30 of them are derived from corn. Yeah. So all those obscure chemical labels on the side of the packages and the ingredient list, most of them are corn, maize, and or soy, which is also... The corn gets broken down into carbohydrates for the food, refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, and the soy gets turned into the fats in which it's fried, and some of the protein fed to the animals. So it's 3/4 of our diet comes from 4 crops.
It is very narrow. It's
very narrow, and you're right. As omnivores, we need a great variety of we need between 75 and 100 different chemical compounds to be healthy, and you're not going to get that from a diet of processed corn and soy and wheat. So we do need to diversify our diet without question, and that means diversifying our fields.
Yes. Let's look at the supermarket where basically all of us shop. One thing you say is that you should shop, well, not only supermarkets, but that you should shop on the edges of a supermarket. Why should you do that?
Well, traditionally in a supermarket, and I'm sure this is true in Iceland as well, although I haven't yet been to one of your supermarkets.
They're just the same.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to going. I'm going to go to one tomorrow. The perimeter is where you put the perishable food. Yeah. So that's where the produce is, the fruits and vegetables. That's where the milk is, usually way in the back. Yeah. That's where the fish is, and the meat and the dairy products. And the middle of the store is where you put the processed foods, the things that never die and never go bad, the eternal foods. And the reason for that is that the stuff along the edge goes bad. It rots. So you need to move it around. You need to move it quickly, and you want it near the loading dock and the trucks. The stuff in the middle you can put on the shelves for a year, sometimes more. And so that's where you get into trouble in the supermarket. When you buy all your food in the middle, you're buying lots of processed food. So to the extent, and you're not going to be able to do this exclusively, but to the extent you can confine most of your shopping to the edge, you're going to eat a healthier diet.
But you say also that we should get out of the supermarket.
When you can go to the supermarket. Well, the farmer's market, I think, is a very good alternative. We have had, in the United States, an explosion of farmer's markets. There are 4,500 of them right now. It's doubled twice in the last 5 years. We also have CSAs, which are farm shares. You buy a share in a farm's output, and every week you get a box of produce for the growing season. That's another good alternative. So there are these alternative food economies are springing up all over the world. And we need to support them with our dollars and or a kroner or whatever. And we need to vote with our forks and help this new industry get started. Because it offers us healthy food, it offers farmers a way to stay in business and compete, and it keeps our land in farmland so it doesn't get developed. So it has many, many benefits.
Another maxim of yours is that we should eat food that rots.
Yes. A food that you have to think about it. A food that doesn't rot. We have these foods that you can. I just bought in the store I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was buying some props for a talk. And there was a package of pot roast beef with gravy that was sold in plastic, shrink wrapped, and it was not refrigerated. And it just on the shelf. It's dehydrated or something. I don't know how they do it. Freeze dried. And it said that the freshness date, you could eat it until December 2011. Now, how real can that be? How do they do that? It's an achievement, but it seems to me that one of the reasons food rots is because other organisms are interested in them. Bacteria, fungi, mice, rats. They're not interested in a lot of processed food. If you put that Twinkie out there, they would not eat it.
You say we should avoid foods that are advertised on television.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I'll tell you why. The healthiest food in the store is the quietest food. It's the food that doesn't boast about itself.
Yeah.
It's the tomato, it's the apple, it's the kale. They don't have a big budget, the people who grow these foods.
No.
The only foods that have big budgets are foods sold by big companies. And these are foods that are processed.
Yeah.
That's the most profitable food in the store. You start with cheap raw ingredients, corn or soy or wheat, and you add layers of processing. You know, cereal, say, you have got 4 cents worth of grain that you turn into $4 box of Cheerios, and then you turn that into an $8 box of cereal bars. That's how you make money. That's where you have the budget for advertising. And so if you avoid foods that are advertised on television, you will tend to avoid also the most deceitful foods, the ones that have health claims on them. The cereals that tell you that they'll prevent swine flu or improve your son's focus in school. I mean, we have these claims on our cereal boxes.
Oh, yeah.
But the really healthy food is quiet.
It doesn't need to make health claims.
Well,
yeah.
it would help if they could. They don't have the money to make health claims.
No, no.
One of the reasons I came up with that rule, though, about TV is that the industry was, which is incredibly clever, was co-opting some of the messages that me and other critics were putting out there. For example, I was saying don't buy foods with more than 5 ingredients.
Yes.
Suddenly they were advertising, Haagen-Dazs was advertising that their ice cream, they started calling their ice cream 5.
Okay.
Because it only had 5 ingredients. Now that's great. What did it used to have? 5 ingredients. They didn't change anything. They just started bragging about the fact they had 5 ingredients. It's still ice cream. I mean, ice cream's wonderful, but it's not health food. So, so I realized that they're so clever at turning these messages around that we should just tune out all the health claims on the food, and that means tuning out the food that's advertised on television.
Don't eat where you fuel.
Yes.
That's another one I like.
Cars should eat differently than people.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel strongly that they have different nutritional needs. They eat a lot of petroleum, of course. And now in the United States, when you go to the gas station, petrol station, you get this whole buffet of foods. But what kind of food is it? It's all processed food. There's no fresh produce there. There's maybe you get some nuts in a bag. That's okay. That's not so bad. But it's usually chips and candy and soda. And ironically, it's usually made from corn, which a lot of now the gas is made from corn because of ethanol.
Yes.
So actually, we are eating the same thing as our cars. We're eating corn-based sweeteners and alcohol.
But one more. Don't eat anything your grandmother wouldn't recognize as food.
Yeah. Well, this is a way to, this goes back to your earlier point about reconnecting us to tradition. And if you're confronting a strange food in the supermarket, some novelty of the food industry, the example I like to use is Go-Gurt, which is a yogurt that comes in a plastic tube. It looks like toothpaste, and you open it and squeeze it into your mouth. It's a very strange product. Lots of chemical additives in it for color and texture. So when you're in the supermarket, rolling down the aisles, just imagine your grandmother or your great-grandmother was with you. Would she recognize that product as food?
Yeah.
I don't think she would. And if she wouldn't recognize it as food, then it's not food. And a lot of the products for sale in the supermarket, I don't think we should dignify with the word food. So I call them edible food-like substances.
Yes.
It's a little bit different. And so the grandmother test, it's really just a kind of mental algorithm to help you sort out the real stuff from the fake stuff. And since we've lost touch, I think you can imagine your grandmother and reconnect with what real food is.
There's another substance that is used very much these days. It's corn syrup.
Yes.
Fructose.
High fructose
corn syrup. I don't think people realize that very much.
It's all over the food supply. Sometimes it's called HFCS. Sometimes it's called high fructose corn syrup. Sometimes it's called crystalline glucose. It has some other names. But what it is it's a relatively new process. It was invented by the Japanese in the 1970s to use a certain enzyme to take normal corn syrup, which is mostly glucose, and make it much sweeter by turning some of it into fructose. It isn't clear that it's any different for you as a matter of health. It's a replacement for sugar because it's much cheaper than sugar. And what that has meant is that it made it made sweetness so cheap that manufacturers started putting it in products that were never sweetened before. So it ends up in breads, it ends up in chips, crackers, it ends up in soups, it ends up in condiments like ketchup and pickles. And it's sneaking all this sugar into our diet. And we don't, even people who try to avoid too much sugar can't avoid it because it's everywhere.